serve a minute. We are gathered to remember and celebrate the life of Mr. Keshav Desiraju. While his sudden passing has been a great shock to all of us, his life has given us so much to commemorate and honor. Mr. Desiraju's contributions to mental health and community health care are well known. I would say that he could turn his mind and energies to almost any subject, ranging from medicine to consumer affairs to music. In this regard, I would like to share an anecdote as narrated by a senior colleague from the consumer movement. There was a long pending proposal before the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, for establishing an UN Commission on Consumer Protection. This was vehemently opposed by most developed countries led by the US, and UNCTAD had appointed a working group on this issue. In these circumstances, there was a crucial meeting in Geneva in January 2015. The Indian delegation was led by Mr. Desiraju. When the proposal came up for discussion, the opposition to establishing the commission was reiterated by the US and its allies. Mr. Desiraju took on the issue and firmly and politely explained its importance and implications. He suggested that if the proposal was not acceptable as was presented, it could be suitably modified instead of being rejected outright. UNCTAD modified the proposal, and instead of the UN Commission, an intergovernmental group of experts on consumer protection was approved in the meeting by consensus and later on by the UN Assembly. The colleague credited Mr. Desiraju for the way he articulated the importance of the matter and his persuasiveness on the issue, which became the turning point in establishing the Intergovernmental Group of Experts on Consumer Protection. Mr. Desiraju was tireless in his efforts to bring about change in whatever role he was playing. There has been an outpouring of grief, rarely seen and from so many quarters. No matter what our background is, each of us has been touched by his incredible levels of energy, commitment, integrity, and wisdom. Today, we will be hearing from his friends and colleagues as they share with us the extraordinary achievements that marked his remarkable life. Before I hand this over to Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi, I would like to briefly share about my interactions with Mr. Desiraju and his contributions to CAG as a board member. In 2014, after he assumed charge as Secretary Consumer Affairs, I met him for the first time. I vividly remember my thoughts as I walked out of his room after the first meeting. Here is one approachable, straightforward, intellectual bureaucrat, is what I thought. Back then, I saw it as the Health Ministry's loss and the Consumer Affairs Ministry's gain. I had the opportunity to meet him quite a few times during his tenure at the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, and he always had the time to listen. I used to share all our work with him, and he always responded. It was during one of our conversations that he mentioned that he was due for retirement in a few months. The next moment, without a bat of my eyelid, I asked him if he would be interested in joining CAG board on his retirement. I was pleasantly surprised when he instantly said that he would be happy to consider as he was planning to settle down in Chennai. And that was when he told me that he knew Mr. Sriram Panchu. Well, the rest is history. He joined the CAG board in 2015. As a member of the board, he was readily available to advise and guide us whenever we sought his counsel, be it work related or otherwise. As I had mentioned earlier, he was easily approachable, prompt to respond to messages, emails, calls, small things that matter a lot. We used to trouble him often with something or the other, and he never complained. His sudden departure has created a void that will take time to normalize. There are so many pleasant memories of working with Mr. Desiraju, but due to time constraint, I think I should stop here. And I would like to call on Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi, former governor of West Bengal, to share a few words and memories of his association with Mr. Desiraju. Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I am somewhat at a loss for words today. It is difficult to speak of Keshav in the past tense. I never thought I would be required to join a memorial meeting for Keshav. So I am like all his friends and those who have gathered here today to participate in this commemoration of Keshav, and those who are listening and hearing and watching this program, in what can be called a state of shock. The shock has overpowered the grief, and the actual event of his death, the fact of his death, has overwhelmed the awareness of our deprivation, which is quite unbearable. Those who are going to speak today and at other meetings of this kind will and should discuss his great contributions to the public weal, not only in India, but internationally, because of his great involvement with public health and with issues that concern the human condition across the world, across continents. But I will just take about 10 minutes or less to speak on the Keshav that I knew as a friend and as a person. And in this, I am acutely aware of the fact that he was my friend, but he was my friend as he was a friend of so many. And I cannot claim to have known him better or more insightfully than anybody else. I knew him for nearly 4 decades. But in all those decades, in every year of those almost 40 years, I knew that I was just one of his many friends, and that I knew only that much about Keshav that came to my experience and to my knowledge. And there were others who knew Keshav's different achievements, accomplishments, attributes, and indeed his personality from different facets. Keshav was an extremely accessible person, as has just been said. He was always there at the end of a phone line, or at the end now of an email link. But Keshav was also an extremely private person. It was very easy to know Keshav, but it was not so easy to understand Keshav. The only person, as I have had the opportunity to say recently, the only person who knew Keshav fully was Keshav himself. Everyone else had a glimpse of Keshav, a very compelling glimpse, which has stayed with us and will always stay with us. But it was not more than a glimpse. And I say this with great admiration of Keshav. And I say this from the pang of pain, which is what we are now in. We are under the hospitality of the Consumer Action Group. So we are talking of Keshav in the context of Keshav's association with the CAG, with those who are connected with the CAG. And of course, with his brief but memorable as Secretary of the Ministry for Consumer Affairs. So I just want to say that there is one product that all of us use without our wanting to acquire it. All of us use that product. We are involuntary consumers of that product. And that product is called Vidhi in Tamil, or fortune, or fate, or destiny. And that is one product which we cannot refer to any technical or empowered agency to rectify or to improve or to bring within a framework of acceptable standards. Vidhi or fortune, kismat or takdir is not amenable to ISI standards. It is of its own, and it strikes hard, as in the case of Keshav's deprivation of his presence in our times. We have to accept. Keshav himself accepted it. He faced the swipes of duradrishta, misfortune, as anybody else. And this was when he lost his mother, he lost his father, he lost some very good friends of his well before their time. So he knew what death and desolation mean. And so we must be aware of that. We have to see what friendship means and what the sudden withdrawal of a friend from our immediate experience means. I have about 6 minutes more, and so I will be concise and say this, that we must cherish every moment of a friendship that we have been fortunate to inherit or to receive or to have stumbled over or to have cultivated, not selfishly, but just aware of the pricelessness of friendship. Keshav, as I said, was friends to many people. This does not mean that he was many things which we did not know. No, not at all. He never hid any side of himself. He was just himself. And different people saw different aspects of Keshav. And so we must, in our apprehension of friends and friendship, see those sides of that friend and that friendship which appeal to us and which we admire, and leave others to see other aspects without envy, without competition, without rivalry, and certainly without resentment. Keshav was a very sharp judge of people and persons, but he kept his judgments to himself. If you were to ask him what he thought of a particular concert or what he thought of a particular musician's repertory, he would tell you objectively what he thought, but never disparagingly, judgmentally in a negative sense. Keshav drew from life fully with great attachment to whatever he liked, be it music or cinema or literature, or the opportunity to do something in the public field, as in the Ministry of Health, in the Ministry of Environment, and very, very pointedly in the Department of Personnel and Training, which is something which is not naturally known in the public sphere, in the sphere of non-governmental organizations, because it was a hardcore bureaucratic department. Keshav's stint in the DOPT made him come to know of individual officers across the country, individual officers and their individual problems, their individualities, indeed their eccentricities. But he got to know all of them from the standpoint of a person who could help, who could also admonish. And in the process, Keshav became, in the world of civil servants, what in the old days, a certain keeper of panchangas in Benares, like the Pandas of Benares, he knew the panchangam of almost every officer in India. And he knew that like a specialization. He loved that specialization. There was no curiosity in it. And he would never speak about anybody in the officers' world to other officers in the grammar or idiom of gossip. No. But he knew their situations and helped individuals out in case after case, whether it was in the matter of getting salaries fixed in particular grades, areas of payments being made, promotions, seniorities being fixed, disciplinary proceedings being sorted out, a whole range of things. Keshav was a friend's friend, a friend of friends. Only the other day, I was told by a dear friend, a lady in her late mid-80s, who had a problem with her family pension. Her late husband had died in Hans, the family pension issue. She was not getting it. Keshav had it sorted out. And she was saying that she is now getting her pension regularly on time thanks to Keshav. Now, this is one individual case. It is nothing like the tobacco lobby issue which he sorted, like the Mental Health Act which he brought in. It's just an individual act. Keshav embraced friends and friendships because he knew the value of human relationships. His friends kept evolving from stage to stage of life. Keshav was a constant factor. The person could grow, a friend of his could grow into and out of situations. Keshav remained constant. And if a person, a friend of his, acquired and disacquired family, Keshav remained a friend to all sections of that family. And somehow this never burdened him. There was a very fine weighing scale in his mind, which could take in digital accuracy and digital infinity, weight upon weight of friends and friends of friends and families of friends, carry all of them together. And I think it is because he did not mix his friendships. He did not juggle his friendships, but kept each of them autonomous, that he was able to do this. Keshav is missed today by more people than can be covered by webinars and conversations like this. By which I mean to say that if Keshav entered an office building to see an officer, he would know the class 4 person who led him into that room, the lift man, the man who served the tea, the man who took the cups away, the private secretary and the PA to the officer he was meeting, all of them for their own sakes, unjudgmentally. Not that he didn't size them up, but he did not give to himself the moral right to pronounce on them. Keshav is missed by all of them. Among the many, and with this I close, who came to his funeral, was one such person who had served him for the last several years and who was now in a modest government job in Delhi. He just flew to Chennai to say goodbye to somebody whose service he had entered as a young man, and now as a family man, whose wife and children have come to look upon Keshav as a kind of guardian, and who feels bereft. Friendship was Keshav's greatest specialization. And it was a friendship that was rather difficult to describe because he did not describe it himself. Which the most important and I think the most elusive attribute was privacy. He shared something in common with lawyers and doctors. For a lawyer and a doctor, each client is exclusive. You don't talk about one to the other. Keshav did not talk about one to the other. He was in that sense like a lawyer and a doctor, but not a lawyer and a doctor to help those persons alone. But he was a lawyer and a doctor to the very idea of friendship. He protected it. He nursed it. He cherished it. I cherish Keshav for that reason.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. I now invite Ms. K. Sujata Rao, former Secretary, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, to share her memories of her association with Mr. Desiraju. Madam Sujata Rao?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Very
ma'am.
clearly, Sujata.
As Mr. Gandhi said, it's very difficult to talk about Keshav in the past tense without getting emotional. It's very hard to think of him in the past tense. And I never ever dreamt that a day would come when I have to talk or pay tributes to him. I thought it would be the other way around, that he would be having to pay tributes to me, not me to him. So it is not going to be easy because there's intense sadness in all our hearts. And it is very difficult to simply accept that he's no more. In fact, two of his friends went all the way to Haridwar and they shared those wonderful pictures where they immersed his ashes at Haridwar. It was so peaceful and it really so serene that I felt that was the best tribute to him. No priest, no mumbo jumbo slokas, no nothing. It was just in silence. They just let go the ashes and he went away with the flowing waters of the Ganges in the Himalayan range, which he loved so deeply and cherished that atmosphere so much. He used to talk often. I mean, he also belonged to the Uttarakhand cadre, and he had this little house deep in the forest about which Mr. Pant knows more about than I would be able to say. Well, our families were connected. We knew of Keshav's grandfather, Dr. Radhakrishna, was a household word for us, deeply respected. And so I knew of Keshav more as a family connected person or somebody who was Girija's cousin or some such family connection. And I was aware of him as he was of me. But it was only when I became a secretary and I had the great, I would say, an honor to have him as my additional secretary that I really got to closely know him and watch him at the workspace, as an IAS officer. Otherwise, he was always around as a deputy director in Mussoorie or as a joint secretary in the education department and so on. And his reputation as a person of great dignity and quiet efficiency was known to all of us. And, it was not surprising when I found him similarly efficient and quiet and very concerned about whatever was the procedures that he had to follow. So he was a very valued colleague. But for me, it was more than just being a colleague. We had so many of them. I had about 2 other additional secretaries, large number of joint secretaries. But Keshav was one person who I could implicitly trust. And believe me, that's a very great stress off one's back when one has somebody in the office. It's extremely, as Mr. Gandhi will know, the bureaucratic processes are full of thorns and so full of mischief that, you're having someone that you can really trust so implicitly is a great blessing. And Keshav was one such person with whom I could not only depend upon, but I could share, and he was like my sounding board. Very often when I felt very confused, or sense of vulnerability, I would be able to very, openly talk with him issues, and he would, also exchange his ideas and give me his sage advice, if I may put it that way. When I was secretary of the National Commission on Macroeconomics and Health, and I had already put in about 15 years in the health sector, but even so, in the ministry, mental health was never a priority at all. As a secretary of NCMH, I realized that, the morbidity of mental health was so high, about 7% of the population have some kind of a mental health problem requiring treatment, required counseling, required medication. And the medication for mental health was extremely high, much, much higher than what we have ever thought of. That really did shock me. And since then, it was always my wish that I was given the power or the authority or the opportunity to make a difference in mental health. So when I became secretary, that was one of the topics I really took up, and I said, we must do something. But no one was willing to look at it because it was so low down in the pecking order. So I caught hold of Keshav. And when I told him that, Keshav, will you take care of this mental health? You must work at it. You must bring in an act for mental health. We need to do something about it. He looked very serious. So I thought, oh no, he's yet another IAS officer who would probably not want to do something which is not very glamorous. But he was actually thinking. And as Mr. Gandhi says, the brain just works in its own way. One doesn't really know what's going on. And while I misunderstood him, because the way he took to mental health with great sincerity and passion, it was amazing. I never had to remind him, are you working at it? Or, do I need to have a review to see what's happening? He just ran with it. And there were a lot of opposition to the kind of work that had to be done from those who were in the disability lobby, wanting mental health to come and be declared as a disability, which Keshav did not believe. But he took them on. They were powerful lobbies. He took them on. And he fought his battles himself. But he got this whole constituency of civil rights, civil society members. And he was phenomenal at that work. And if today people attribute the Mental Health Care Act of 2017 to Keshav, he deserves that, even though he left the ministry in 2014 and the act only came up in 2017. But it was really his work and his handiwork that we see today. Mental Health Care Act, which makes mental health access to mental health services as a human right. It's not it's a very radical step forward, and putting it on the map, saying here is mental health, which we have to care about and do some work about, So, I mean, it was just an amazing achievement. And in life, even if you get one or two such achievements, I think you've justified your existence. You don't have to have a string of 20 of them. It's not possible, because it took him a good 5-6 years to give it some shape. And what was even more demonstrative of his commitment was in 2017, he had retired. He could have said, well, I've done my best, and shrugged his shoulders like most bureaucrats do about when they took the ministry. But back he was again in the corridors of Nirman Bhavan, sitting with the joint secretary concerned and saying, now make the rules. I don't think, people who are aware of bureaucratic systems, we bring in a lot of acts, but we never follow up with the rules. That may take 2 years, 3 years, or never. And the acts just are acts because they can never be enforced because there are no rules. So, and Keshav was aware of that. He knew that. And he said, this Mental Health Act will again go into the dustbin if I don't get the rules going. And within 6 months' time, 6 months flat, which is really very fast. I can tell you it's not so easy. He got the rules done, and the enforcement of the act really became real and practical. So I think it was a great achievement, and I think Keshav's contribution to that area is something very critically important and significant. And he was so passionate, the way he would plod on doggedly, and he was not bothered about whether anybody else was interested or not. He didn't need authority or any sanction from any minister or anybody else to plod him on to do what he believed in. And that's what attracted me about Keshav. He was a person with quiet values. I mean, as Mr. Gandhi so well described now and in his article, which I read so beautifully, sir, you have written about him. It was really, you captured the essence of what he was and what his mind is like. That he believed in quiet dignity. He was never flamboyant. He believed in values and never had any doubts about, or he would never debate to say, do we or do we not have to be secular? Do we not believe in equality? These were done. These had to be, there was no discussion or dialogue about certain basic fundamental values of humanity with him. And that is, of course, the Nehruvian, as you would call it today, I suppose. But those were the values that he grew up with, I grew up with, and that's something that we really cherished between us and among us. We have a small group of IAS officers. We call ourselves the Constitutional Conduct Group. And in that, every letter, whatever it is that is written, Keshav will be the first person to sign off, because he was so committed to promote certain sense of fairness and justice around, and particularly those are valuable in today's India. Another thing, the 3 days before he passed away, I'm not very good at constantly ringing up anyone, and nor was he. He was also very busy with life, but we knew what we were doing. And so it was not as if I was on daily touch, but 3 days before he passed away, on a matter regarding India International Center, I called him. And he said something that, you mean you're not a member of the IIC? I said, no. And that got us into saying that, look what India was like, what Delhi was like. When we were growing up there, we didn't have to be a member of this or that. It was such a small city and we were just all over the place. And then we started talking about his grandfather. He revered his grandfather so much. And then we started talking about music, and it was a long chat. It was almost like a farewell chat with me in hindsight. And his love for music was something which I too shared with him, though he was much more knowledgeable and had a profound understanding of Carnatic classical music. And one day he called me and he said, Sujata, now I need to talk to you only in Telugu because I want to write about Tyagaraja. And my Telugu is not so good. So, he finished with MS Subbulakshmi and was going to write on Tyagaraja. And I was really looking forward to that book because I know how much of research and what depth he would have gone into, all the Tyagaraja Kritis, which not very much has been done, I think. So that was something that was so wonderful, a wonderful aspect of Keshav, which I didn't really find many people I could share with, because not many bureaucrats in our circle of friendships are interested in Carnatic classical music. And that's something that I really shared with him on a very personal basis. And I will miss him greatly because of that. And there is so much to say about Keshav that it's very difficult to really be able to encapsulate his whole being in 10 minutes. But we had a moments of laughter over, gossiping over, as Mr. Gandhi said, he knew the background and the follies and the greatness and the strengths and the weaknesses of almost every IAS officer. And he had a great sense of humor. So he would come into my room and give me some gossip. And it would be great fun just to talk, not with malice or anything, but just fun. And these you could share so openly with him without having to feel that, that it could hurt or harm anyone. And he was so easy to be with as a person and work with. He was a great colleague. I really cherished my months of work with him, and glad that I maintained my relationship and my friendship with him even after retirement. Of course, he was a great connoisseur of art. He loved music, and he had so many facets of his personality, which, as Mr. Gandhi said, it's difficult to even assess what all he knew and what he really cared about, because there were so many things he cared about, and read a lot. He loved books. He loved. One day I told him that, Keshav, I've just come back from Vipassana, and I think Buddha is the greatest person. And the next day I get a beautiful essay, which is not published, beautiful essay on Buddha written by Dr. Radhakrishnan, beautifully written. And so I told him, I said, you've given this to me. I think you should publish it and let the wider world know what a beautiful essay that he has written on Buddha. So I think Keshav, if I'm not mistaken, was trying to sort out and sift all Dr. Radhakrishnan's papers and try and do something about his library and his work. I don't know, sir, whether he was very committed and interested to do that. So, if he had so many things that he wanted to do, he has left far too soon. But I really think on some of these issues, at least on what he wanted to do about Dr. Radhakrishnan's library or his works and take those forward, it would be very nice to Keshav if we could complete some of those agendas that he had set for himself. But he was an outstanding officer. He was an outstanding officer, outstanding and a very valued colleague, a great friend, a person with a great sense of humor, and who wore his power and authority very lightly on his shoulders. He didn't care about, he was not overwhelmed by ministers. He was not overawed by power. And he just he was a very simple person who believed greatly in self-respect and dignity of his being. And it was an honor to have known him. I hope his soul rests in peace. I just think that he's gone ahead because he had evolved so much in this lifetime that he had to move on and carry on his mission of finding his own soul and his own being. I mean, that's the Buddhist philosophy, which I also believe in. So I think that's what's happened. Thank you so much for inviting me to share some of my thoughts.
Thank you, ma'am. You have described beautifully his ability to take on a cause and crusade on its behalf, even a cause very low in the order of importance. Thank you for helping us see all that was great about him. Thank you. I would like to invite Professor K. Srinath Reddy, President, Public Health Foundation of India, to share a few words and memories of his association with Mr. Desiraju. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I came to know Keshav Garu about around 12 to 14 years ago, when he was still Health Secretary of Uttarakhand, and a mutual friend introduced us. But I came to know him better after he became the Additional Secretary of Health at the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and later on, of course, as the Union Health Secretary. It was always Keshav Garu and Srinath Garu. While there was a great deal of affection, admiration, and to some extent, intimacy, to the extent that a very private person like Mr. Desiraju permitted, as Mr. Gopal Gandhiji had already explained, that private screen was always there. But he reached out beyond that with a sense of affection, which was always very perceptible. but the honorific which the Telugus use of Garu was always there in our conversation. Indeed, a friend who is at the World Health Organization now for several years and knows Keshav Garu quite well, said that despite their working on a board together for several years, it was always Ghaffar Saab and Keshav Saab. So the warmth, the affection, the friendship were always there, but that privacy and that slight element of not letting that barrier of guarded privacy be breached, that was always there. But he was a friend to all, admired by so many, as we have now seen in the outpouring of grief that has come through after his demise, or even at the time of his retirement from office. And even when he stepped down as health secretary and moved to the other portfolio of the other ministry, when there was a farewell meeting organized by a number of people interested in public health, and where actually I called him Health Secretary Emeritus. And there it was very clear that the world of public health and health overall considered him a true friend and a champion. And they held him close to his heart and continued to admire him, irrespective of which official designation he had, because he was always seen as a champion of public health and health equity. I have known him in several capacities, both at the Public Health Foundation of India, as well as at the Population Foundation of India, whose board he was chairing till the time of his demise. And I was actually inducted into his board. I must mention that his value system and courage of conviction were remarkable. When we had a problem with our FCRA registration being annulled, and there was a very large foreign grant that was coming into the Population Foundation of India, and the funding agency asked for details on who all had a problem with their FCRA from the board, I offered to resign from the board rather than impede the grant coming to Population Foundation of India. Keshav Garu firm stand. He said, we are prepared to lose the grant, but we are not prepared to lose you. And this is our position. Please do not step down. So that again was a remarkable quality in a person who stood by those values. I do believe that he contributed tremendously to tobacco control, which was an area where I was very active. His commitment to mental health has been spoken of so many times today and elsewhere too. I strongly believe that in 2011, when the United Nations had convened a high-level meeting to discuss a political declaration on non-communicable diseases, and they selected out 4 risk factors: tobacco, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, and alcohol, but did not include mental health, but only had cardiovascular disease, diabetes, chronic respiratory disease, and cancer. India was the one that pushed very hard to have mental health included, at least in the political declaration, as an area that warranted attention and action. And I believe the salutation for that effort must go to the Indian Ministry of Health, and particularly to Sri Keshav Desiraju's advocacy at that point in time. He was also committed to equitable health systems and was very keen on health policy and systems research, and bringing in the academia and the civil society as close as possible to health policy making, and to ensure that they could be participants in planning, implementation, monitoring. And to that extent, he sponsored a large number of young researchers to go to the Beijing conference on health policy and systems research, and then was instrumental in initiating a proposal for establishing a national knowledge platform where the health administrators and the health researchers, as well as the health-related civil society representatives, would interact together in order to really try and shape policies in a people-friendly manner. So the number of initiatives that he has taken are quite remarkable, but his personal qualities have already been alluded to, and they were absolutely tremendous. In fact, he took his official designation lightly, but he took his official responsibilities with unswerving commitment. He was gentle, unassuming, approachable, with no trace of pretense. He was universally respected, firm in conviction, but never rigid in his positions, amenable to persuasion, but unyielding to pressure from vested interests or political bosses. He had no trace of malice in him. As an administrator, he was a great problem solver and extremely astute. As the chair of the Board of Population Foundation of India, I found that quality remarkable. But his lack of any official, in a sense, he donned the mantle of office so lightly, and his lack of consciousness of that official power and position was quite remarkable. In fact, soon after he stepped down as health secretary, he and I were both invited to a WHO meeting in Islamabad. For both of us, it was the first visit. And we were supposed to fly out on a Monday morning. And on Sunday, there was a major bomb explosion in Karachi. In Islamabad itself, there were all kinds of protests and barricades, and the army was being called in. And I called him up to say, shall we cancel our visit? He said, let's talk to our hosts. And the hosts assured that we would be safe. And he said, we cannot let down our hosts. And both of us flew there. We had to report. There was at least 4 members of the Indian delegation were there. Some of them civil society representatives. We had to go to the local police station to report ourselves because that was a requirement there. He got all our papers. He went on behalf of all of us. And here was the former Health Secretary of India, just stepped down, not least bothered by his official position. But he said, all of you can continue with the conference. I'll go to the police station and get all of us registered. That was the level of unassuming nature that he had. And it's not a surprise that he was a friend to all, but slave to none. And that's a remarkable quality indeed. I have been asked by the WHO Alliance for Health Policy and Systems Research, whose board member he was till his demise, to convey their condolence because they did not know who to send it to. So I am using this forum to read out their message. The Alliance for Health Policy and Systems Research Secretariat and Board, where Keshav Saab served for 6 years, is shocked to hear about his death. He was a gentleman, a gentle voice, and a respected global health leader. We are sad and will miss his support, not only to us, the Alliance, but also to the whole global health policy and systems research community, for which he was one of the biggest champions. Our deepest condolences to his family, friends, and colleagues. We will miss him. I am only reminded when I think of him of what William Shakespeare wrote of a very honorable gentleman. Quote, his life was gentle and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. I believe Mr. Desiraju was emblematic of the best qualities of human being. Indeed, he did not pass away. As an elderly gentleman once told me, people do not pass away, they pass on, because they pass on their values, their traditions, their virtues to inspire others who are still left behind. And his values are a remarkable collection indeed of integrity, intellectual honesty, and unswerving courage of conviction. I believe that his love of music also made him a practitioner of the Sneha Raga, and he was abundantly generous in distributing his Sneha to so many people who now live with his memories and try and lead their lives on the basis of the virtues that he has passed on as his legacy.
Thank you, sir. You have spoken affectionately about Mr. Desiraju. We could relate to every word you spoke, the private person that he was, and yet how he could be a friend to everyone. The number of fields that he was involved, both in India and on international stage, is amazing, as was his ability to see things through to completion. Thank you for reminding us of his strength and wisdom. Thank you, sir. I now invite Dr. R. Tara, Vice Chairman, Schizophrenia Research Foundation, to share her memory of her association with Mr. Desiraju. Over to you, madam.
Yes, thank you very much. Most of you know about Keshav's contribution to mental health, but it was in 2010 when he was Additional Secretary in Nirman Bhavan that I first met him. One of my friends in Delhi had told me then that here is a Madrasi, many people below the Vindhyas, we are still referred to as Madrasis in Delhi. So there's a Madrasi in the health ministry whom you should meet, Tara, and he may be able to help you. So I did fix a time and I went and met him. And as always, I poured my heart out regarding mental health, what should be done, what should not be done. There should be a mental health bill before the act, so on and so forth. I spoke continuously for 15 minutes, I think. And at the end of, he did not interrupt me even once. And sometimes I wondered whether he was really listening or not. But at the end of it, he just smiled and said, thank you very much, Dr. Tara. I am now going to ask you a few questions. And there he shot out so many questions, 6 to 7 of them, wherein he revealed all his plans for mental health. I really thought I had been preaching to the choir all along, and I was so embarrassed, believe me. But I was also so happy that here was a man who could well be the champion for mental health, because mental health has no champions at all. And here we could find in him a champion, and truly he was one. I have seen him since with the Mental Health Bill, Mental Health Care Act. The act was no joke, let me assure you. He had to speak to many, many kinds of stakeholders, namely the mental health professionals, who can be a difficult lot, the users of services, the family members, the NGOs, government officials. They all come with contradictory and controversial views and opinions. And sometimes I have seen Keshav very rarely he loses his cool, I know that, but I think I have seen him very justifiably so lose his cool in some of these meetings, but in a very, very, very nice way where he would communicate to the people. I'm saying this because it was really a very challenging task that he took, and he did it so well. And after he retired, he told me in Delhi that he was coming to Chennai, and he said there were 2 reasons he was coming. One was a family responsibility, the other was a music academy, his music. And so even then I had told him that he must get onto the board of staff, which of course he was happy to. He was associated with many mental health organizations and NGOs. And what happened was a lot of people came to me and said, you must get Keshav onto our board. So when I told him that, I said, Keshav, see, there's a huge demand for you. Please, people want you to come on their board. He said, no, please tell them that I have to do 2 things. I have to travel and I have to write books. I'm not sure how much he traveled. I'm aware that he made a trip to London and returned, but I'm not sure how much he traveled really. But he wanted to travel. And of course, we have seen his 2 books, the last one being MS Lakshmi. And when he was writing that, I was happy to introduce him to a few people, one of whom was Rajiv Menon, who himself was planning a film on MS Subbulakshmi. And Rajiv called me that day and said what a lovely conversation he had with Keshav regarding MS and how much he knew about him. So he had touched people in various spheres, in various kinds of personalities. And in SCARF itself, he would not say much during the board meetings, but there he was, keenly observing everything. You know, his silence was golden, as we say. And he would, we are a center who train postgraduate students for the National Board of Examinations. And he would always say, you have to take on more and more students. SCARF should train more students because on one hand, you talk of building capacity. On the other hand, you should do this. So wherever there was any activity which had a national impact or a macro level impact, it was Keshav who pointed that out to us first. A lot of his personal qualities have been explained, but once I told him that, Keshav, you are such a good listener and you are so non-judgmental, and that you would have made a very good psychiatrist. So he just smiled. You know, I wish he had said, yes, I would have loved to be a psychiatrist, but he did not say that, but he just smiled, and I knew he enjoyed that moment a lot. So we have seen Keshav suggest many programs to us, and one of the times that I really enjoyed was the cafeteria at Music Academy. Believe me, we were there almost every day, every evening, having coffee. We did not discuss health or consumer affairs or mental health. It was only music and music all the way. But as people have said, he was not a bitter critic. He was a very constructive critic, and he would speak very nicely about the scientific aspects of music. So we could, the last time I saw Keshav was Mr. Gandhi. I must tell you that I saw him with you when you were having lunch at the boat club. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. And both of you were so immersed in conversation with each other that I did not have the heart to come and disturb you or Keshav. And that unfortunately was the last time I saw him. So we could go on and on about Keshav, his contribution to mental health. I have had close to a dozen emails from all my international colleagues who have heard him, who have interacted with him. Even the UN meeting that Dr. Srinath Reddy was referring to, even people who were at that meeting and who knew how he could champion the cause of mental health, not just globally, locally, but internationally. At least 12 to 15 emails I have received expressing their shock, their dismay, and saying that India has indeed lost a champion for mental health. And that is what we have all lost. We have lost a very dear friend. And I would say, goodbye, Keshav. You have a place in our hearts, in all our hearts, that's going to be very difficult to replace. But that is it. And we have to live with it. Thanks to CAG for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. His ability to disagree in only the most gentlemanly of ways, quietly and calmly, is something that was unique to him. He has touched the lives of thousands of people, especially people with mental health illnesses, in ways that they will never know. A good listener and a man full of empathy. What a gentleman he was. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today. I would now like to invite Mr. Sriram Panchu, Senior Advocate and Trustee at CAG, to share his memories of his association with Mr. Desiraju. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Saroja, and good evening, everyone. I've known Keshav from the time we were at college together, Elphinstone College, Bombay. Of course, our families knew each other. In 1983, I was afflicted with an attack of poliomyelitis and lost movement in my leg and both hands. And the only exercise recommended for me was swimming. The only problem there was I didn't know how to swim. Keshav was in Madras then. And Keshav said, look, I will come along with you every day. It's high time I also learned to swim. So for a couple of months and perhaps more, every morning I would pick up Keshav and we would go to the pool at Savera or wherever. And while I realized that, yeah, okay, he wanted to learn to swim, I think 60% of that effort he put in was to help me. Over the years, we continued to meet and we had many breakfasts at IIC in Delhi, where he would talk, he would open up, I would open up. I think gentle and genuine are two expressions that cover Keshav very well. In addition, he was modest and self-effacing. And I'm quite sure wherever he is, he's looking at us and asking the question, is all this necessary? I look at Keshav's life and I see one long record, a long track record of service. Service to country and service to its people. And I think there's no doubt that this man always did his best and always did the right thing. And did not compromise, even when he knew that his not compromising would cost him dear. I still remember the time that he was replaced as health secretary. This was a man who had such plans for mental health, for other aspects of health in India. And he was replaced over the issue of the chairman of the Medical Council, Keshav Desiraju. And I think for whatever he has to answer for, Mr. Ghulam Nabi Azad has a lot to answer for this one. Because it was a very, very unfair removal from their office. Of course, consumer groups were delighted because he came in then as Secretary of Consumer Protection. And again, he did a great deal, for the department and for organizations. But I can't help but feel that, the amount that we lost when he didn't continue as Secretary of Health could never really be made up in any other field. Once freed of the shackles of officialdom, there was more service coming from him. And I look at this list of organizations that he was part of. CAG, the Banyan, SCARF, Vidyasagar, the Cancer Institute, the Lawrence School, Lovedale, Population Foundation of India, and the Center for Equity Studies. Not to mention, boards of companies where he was asked by government to serve. And he did all this so willingly, readily, fully. Keshav lived a simple life. There was nothing very fanciful. And I remember him always with a smile, which I can only call indulgent smile. which covered situations, people, organizations. There was something very indulgent in that. The knowing and understanding and acceptance and a gentleness. But what I also remember is the trademark Keshav veto. And I've seen this on a number of occasions at CAG meetings. Some proposal would be made and Keshav would raise his eyebrows. That was step one. If that didn't work, then there was silence. The stage beyond saw him smile. So when you got, the raised eyebrow and the silence and the smile, you knew what was going to come. And if the person who made that proposal didn't take it off the table, the Keshav questions would come. And 2 or 3 of those questions were quite enough to demolish whatever it was that Keshav didn't want to be done. This is a huge loss. It's a loss to us as friends. It's a loss to so many organizations who need resources like Keshav. And I also think that, we talk of IQ and EQ, but I'm going to say the moral quotient of this country. The moral quotient fell sharply on the 5th of September. I'm going to read a few sentences from what some of my colleagues have written, because I think I speak not just myself, but for others at CAG. And this is what Tara Mundi says. He says, I first met him when he was Secretary Consumer Affairs. He was not a typical bureaucrat. Agreed to meet me and give me the time we needed. Friendly and cordial. He kept in touch and knew of CAG's work. And during his time as trustee of CAG, he was very involved. Gave us a lot of suggestions on how to deal with government and with standing committees of parliament. He rarely missed a trustees meeting and always participated with enthusiasm that motivated all our staff. I consulted him sometimes with Dr. Hema on several aspects of CAG's work outside the office over coffee and cake. Needless to say, discussions went well beyond CAG matters and into current affairs, culture, and music. He participated in our board meeting on 31st of August and with his usual humility, introduced himself to the new staff as a retired bureaucrat. I mentioned that he was far more qualified than some of us since he'd been Secretary of Consumer Affairs. Little did we realize that this would be the last time with him. He was a rock that supported CAG the last 6 years. Hema says, I found Keshav to be someone who got fully involved with whatever he was engaged with, and his approach was balanced, insightful, and practical. He was a good institution builder and a great mediator. He provided valuable inputs both in organizational matters as well as outreach and other efforts. We will badly miss his presence. And now here are 2 junior people. Vishnu Mohan Rao, Senior Researcher, CAG. I've had the privilege of seeking the advice of Mr. Desiraju for my work on a couple of occasions. His advice and clear insights allowed me to reorient my approach to the project, ensuring that I was able to complete the work successfully. Now, we must remember that the kind of insights that Keshav would have to offer for a project like this was something which would take a lot of time. Sumana Narayanan, I found Mr. Desiraju to be very polite and unassuming. He was always interested in every aspect of the work we do. His inputs were insightful and helped frame my thoughts better, giving greater clarity and purpose to the work. So I think, he's going to be missed all round and by so many people. There's the sense of an untimely passing on will always, I think, haunt us, will always be with us. But today we celebrate his life and we give thanks for the person he was. And we give thanks for the fact that he entered our lives, each one of us, and was such a good part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Panchu. Your memories of him dating back to your college days has reminded us of so many stellar qualities that all of us recognized in him. How he was motivated by his need to serve his county and his fellow men, and how he did this without ever compromising on his values, how he always stood up for what was right. He was a man of simple tastes and led a simple life, who always walked around with a smile and desire to help. Every organization that has had the pleasure and privilege of working with him will forever miss these qualities. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, sir. So now, so the next speaker is Dr. Vandana Gopikumar. But Vandana had messaged me that she's overcome with grief and preferred to not speak live today. So she has instead recorded and shared a video message, which we will play now. Vamsi?
Yes, Saroja.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Is the audio audible for everyone?
No. Yes, I can hear.
Mr. D, that's what I call him. And he'd respond, yes, Vandana. I just took those conversations so much for granted, whether it was on the telephone or whether in person. Then you realize all of a sudden that life is just so unpredictable and short that there's nothing that you can take for granted. But on a happier note, I'm just so glad and feel extremely privileged that I could be a part of his life and him a part of my husband's and mine and the Banyan's life. We met first 10 years ago when, under his chairmanship, the first very progressive mental health policy was drafted, as a result of which the needs of some very, very vulnerable persons, including those homeless and living in abject poverty, was treated as an absolute right, an entitlement. That was transformative. And that was him. People who he thought could share their wisdom and insights. He depended on collective wisdom, but he never was sort of operating only on the basis of what he read or what he heard, and would always be on the field and experience things firsthand. So I think that combination came from a set of strong values, beginning with a sense of integrity, his deep sense of purpose, his sense of getting a task on hand done and how, his commitment to it, his sense of accountability, regardless of how small or big it was, he had to get it done. And doing all of that with a sense of responsibility, understated elegance. He would just freely and generously give away credit to the whole world. So these values of integrity, of taking a team together, of being informed, of keeping the vision and nothing else in mind, of viewing service to those who were the most deprived as his only goal. These are rare. And I think these came from the person that he was, that I, again, fortunately was very closely privy to. Over the years, we became sort of family. And he, not just was he my neighbor, but we did many things together, wrote several editorials, argued, fought, had many fun evenings over cakes that he would bake and cocktails that my husband would make. Several chats with colleagues at the Banyan and friends, young friends who would drop by. You wouldn't see him treat anybody differently. It could be the Queen of England. It could be Bala, who cooks at home. It could be Petu and Smokey, my doggies, and he loved Petu, of course, who would always just sit by his side. So the seat is reserved even today for him. And there's a space for Petu, and Petu, I think, is going to miss him terribly. But yeah, so the sense of equality with which he treated everybody, where he didn't see differences, where he held every friendship as sort of special, and gave his very best to everything and every person that he came in contact with. So the up-and-coming bureaucrats, I think, have several lessons to learn from him. One, remain focused on your values, and your only value as a public servant is really to make a difference to millions of lives who are in desperate situations today. And so do it with a sense of passion, do it with a sense of urgency, and do it with a sense of commitment. And nothing is more important than that. He did it in the field of mental health, in the field of disability, in the field of education. And as a result, touched many, many lives, not just through the work that he did, but like I said, in addition to this, also remain grounded, therefore let go of your ego and foster a climate of trust, of exchange of ideas and of open-mindedness. Encourage people to open up and speak and engage with people. I don't see very many people do that, whereas he listened and he wanted for you to speak, and he would do his very best to get you to speak. At the same time, there would be such a friendly and kind and gentle demeanor that no one really would feel intimidated or that you were speaking to somebody who could be inaccessible if he chose to. These qualities, these personality traits, combined with his sharp intellect, with his wit, with his desire to bring about a change, and do all that he could, with a deep sense of responsibility to the extent that when he was lying, in a sense, perhaps in a state of discomfort, he still sent his last couple of mails to cancel a few meetings that he thought he wouldn't be able to make, and directed me to go to Indira Auntie, that's his aunt's house, to just tell, because it was Teacher's Day, to tell her that he would be on his way after he went to the hospital with my husband. That deep sense of commitment to everything that you take on, under all circumstances, is something that very few people of courage, of high levels of integrity would do. And that he did it with such humility, something that I feel extremely, extremely proud of. Mr. D, I will always call you that. And you will always remain extremely special to the world. and extremely special to me. I don't really have to say that. I will miss you, but your memories are always going to be a part of my life, and many lessons that I learned from you will always guide me and hopefully make me the better person that I want to be. So glad to have had you in my life, and I am glad, or rather I'm hopeful, that your memories will take away some of the pain that I feel today.
Thank you, Vamsi. Thank you, Dr. Vandana. Every photo you had chosen reminds us of the great loss that each of us will have to come to terms with. You spoke of how he always listened before he spoke, his service to vulnerable groups of people and his quiet dignity, and that he could bake cakes apart from all the other skills he had. An awesome man who can never be replaced, no matter how many years pass by. Thank you very much. So today's meeting is exemplified by the wide range of people who are gathered here. I would like to thank each and everyone who joined us. Many thanks to all the speakers for joining us today and throwing light on the varied facets of a very special person. CAG was truly fortunate to have him on board. We want to especially stand with Mr. Desiraju's family through this difficult time, knowing that there is nothing we can say or do that will compensate for this loss. However, we do hope that hearing how he touched lives in so many unique ways will be some small consolation. Mr. Desiraju was one of those rare people who shine bright for a short season but are gone from our lives far too soon. We will miss him dearly, and there will be innumerable times in the future where we will remember and miss his patient hearing, his empathy, and his wisdom. If there is someone here who would like to share a special memory of him, please do write to us and we will pass it on to his family. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you.